I also want to introduce Frank, who is doing our sign interpretation. So it's great to see everybody here this evening. Thank you for this edition of Coffee with our Congresswoman. I'd also like to acknowledge that Councillor Beatriz Gomez-Mucad is here. Beatriz, if you could, Ward Councillor for Ward 5 is here. State Representative Christine Barber called to say she's sorry she had to miss, but something unexpected came up. So thank you, Ursula, for providing Spanish interpretations this evening. Frank also for providing sign interpretation. I have the great honor this evening to co-host this evening with our Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. I first met our Congresswoman back in 2012 when she came to welcome me as the new executive director at Girls Leap. It's a violence prevention nonprofit for at-risk girls located in Dorchester. At the time, Ayanna was already known, Councillor Pressley at the time, but I was becoming a little familiar. But at the time, Congresswoman Pressley was already known for speaking out on behalf of and fighting for people whose voices have not always been heard by those in power. My first impression was that not only was her heart in the right place, but that our Congresswoman was a person who takes action, uses her powerful words to fight for positive change. Her beautiful, uplifting, inspiring, and intensely powerful words. Since then, I've seen her work and heard her speak for justice, for human rights, for public health, for survivors, for reproductive justice, for housing, for labor, for transportation, for families, and for all of us. As mayor, my top priority is creating a city here in Somerville that is inclusive, equitable, where we can all thrive together. I know that the Congresswoman shares that vision, and I was delighted to support her in her bid for Congress, and now I'm delighted to work together with my values partner, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, to make our shared values into our shared realities here in Somerville, in Boston, and in the district beyond. Over the years, thank you to her continued leadership, she has secured millions of dollars for Somerville residents. She's here to do the hard work with us, like I knew she would. I want to provide a few quick updates about how we are putting those funds to work at the local level for our people and our community. And then I'll turn it over to the Congresswoman. So, using our federal funds locally. Let's start with the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA for the short. That was enacted almost 2 years ago today. This was a once-in-a-generation stimulus bill which secured more than $77 million for Somerville to put towards housing, health, human services, infrastructure, education, and economic development. ARPA is a game changer. And thanks to our Congresswoman and her colleagues in Washington, we've been able to provide emergency supports to our residents and businesses while also pursuing bold initiatives to unravel deeper and more entrenched inequalities. Last year, we led a community process to ensure that spending decisions were community-driven. And now we've got some exciting updates. First, let's talk about housing. We must use every resource available to ensure all residents have safe and stable housing. Among other new initiatives, we've significantly increased the ARPA funds in our flexible rental and mortgage assistance program to $4.4 million. And the Somerville Homeless Coalition and the Community Action Agency of Somerville, known as CAS, are distributing assistance directly to constituents. Next, I want to highlight our small but mighty nonprofit community. We set up a dedicated funding round just for nonprofits to ensure they're getting the supports they need to thrive. This summer, we will be getting $10 million out the door and into their hands. Another structural issue we're chipping away at in ARPA is pay inequity, particularly for women of color. We're putting $2 million towards initiatives like training in high-demand industries, quarry expungement combined with job training services, paid internships, apprenticeships, digital literacy initiatives, and more. And later this year, we'll launch our first ever universal basic income pilot program. Poverty cannot continue to steal health, wellness, and opportunities from Somerville residents. We're going to use this pilot as an opportunity to learn what works, and then we'll chart a longer-term path for universal basic income from here. Flooding. Okay, Poplar Street Pump Station, if you don't, that's the location that where 60% of the outflow from the city of Somerville goes. It's over in the Brick Bottom area near Herb Chambers. Beyond ARPA, Congresswoman Pressley has been an invaluable advocate for local infrastructure. She successfully secured millions of federal dollars for the long-awaited Poplar Street Pump Station in the Inner Belt neighborhood. And I'm excited to share that construction will begin this spring. This vital project will help reduce flooding, reduce water pollution, and build resilience to the severe weather wrought by climate change. It will also become the site of Art Farm, the city's planned urban agricultural and cultural open space. We have a community meeting to share more on Monday, the 27th. Then Clarendon Hill Housing and Transportation Equity Project. Finally, most recently, Congresswoman Pressley, Senator Markey, and Senator Warren secured $2.4 million for the Clarendon Hill Housing and Transportation Equity Project to add 354 units of affordable housing to the Clarendon Hill Public Housing Complex. This is another long-awaited project getting underway this spring. So that's just to highlight a few. There's at least, 30 or 40 more. Thank you, Congressman. So that's not too shabby. And I know she has much more to share with us. So please join me in welcoming our Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley.
Well, actually, that was everything. So I'll just say ditto. And we can all go and have some refreshments, give you some time back. In all seriousness, thank you, Mayor Ballantyne, District Service, for being my partner in good on so many issues of consequence. I do want to take a moment just to brag a little bit in that as the Congresswoman for the Massachusetts 7th, representing majority parts Boston, Cambridge, all of Somerville, Randolph, Everett, Chelsea, and a little bit of Milton, I have 3 women mayors in my district. Cambridge, Somerville, Boston. And I did just want to extend a happy Women's History Month to our mayor. And to all of the women here who are makers and shapers of history in your own right. Let's give it up to our grandmothers, our aunties, our sisters, our daughters. And just so y'all know, my staff is already nervous about time because none of this is in my script. But they're used to me, so okay, just one more thing, okay? All right. Thank you, Frank. In that, I did just take a moment to give some verbal bouquets in honor of Women's History Month. If you all did not see the news, I have reintroduced the Equal Rights Amendment. It is long overdue. Equality under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex. We are still, in many instances, despite great progress, we don't have our full freedoms. And in the midst of unprecedented attacks against our bodily autonomy and that of our LGBT siblings as well, it is long past time. The states have met that ratification threshold. They did their job. The women of this country as sure as hell have done our job, and now Congress needs to do theirs and pass the ERA and do away with that arbitrary deadline that was set in 1972. Okay, all right, thank you. I promise, I'm going to get to my notes. I mean, y'all know I'm the granddaughter of a Baptist preacher, so it's always a mixed bag. It's always a mixed bag. I do also want to do, in addition to our Madam Mayor, I wanted to acknowledge our custodial staff, whose name I took a moment ago. This matters to me because as someone who worked in the service industry for 6 years, I know what it is to be a part of a workforce that is often treated as if you are invisible. And so it is important to me to lift those names up. I want to thank the facility staff, Frank, Butch, and Dora, for supporting us this evening and supporting this learning community every day. I want to thank my brother, Frank, who rocks out with me in all of my ad-libs. Frank, appreciate you, brother. Our ASL interpreter, thank you. And of course, Ursula, we thank you for providing Spanish translation this evening. Okay, thank you so much, my sister. All right, well, let's get into it. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. It feels good to be in community with you once again. We're still standing, y'all. We made it to the other side. It is so good to be in community with all of you. Thank you. You could have been a million other places, but the fact that you chose to be here this evening is really a testament to you, that you care about your neighbor, you care about our community, you care about this commonwealth and our country, and I could not do anything that I do without you, because I really do seek to practice cooperative governing. So thank you all for being here this evening. Well, it has been an intense couple of months in Congress, to say the least. Since the Republicans took control of the House, they've shown time and again that they are anti-woman, anti-worker, anti-science, anti-immigrant, and given their ongoing perpetuation of the big lie, anti-democratic. Their priorities have been undermining healthcare access, giving handouts to the wealthy, and ignoring the folks, ignoring the issues that are top of mind for everyday people, the thing that folks really care about. And Republicans have made it clear that they have nothing but contempt for working folks across this country. And based on what happened with the speakership fight, 4 days, 14 ballots, not only do they have contempt for everyone who calls this country home, given their policy violence and their budgets that do not censor the humanity and dignity of every person, they also have contempt for one another. The chaos with which we began the 118th Congress continues. That being said, I do not have the luxury of cynicism or apathy, because many of you in this room are counting on me to stand in the gap with this awesome responsibility and partnership with which you have entrusted me. And so, since policy is my love language, I still seek to advance policies that go as bold and as deep as the hurt, and also go as big to meet your dreams and your aspirations. We know what it is to live in the present and the aftermath of legislated hurt and harm. Now we deserve to know what it is to live in a present and an aftermath of legislated healing, of legislated peace, of legislated justice, of legislated equity. So I know the Democrats don't have the gavel. We are technically in the minority. But there is nothing minor about the work that we must do. And we still have many levers of power available to us. Since policy is my love language, I have the power of the pen. I have the power of letterhead for congressional oversight. I have the power of platform, the power of convening. Mayor Ballantyne spoke to the power of the purse. And most of all, the power of the movement that I really do see each and every one of you as being a part of. So look, I don't want to sit here and rail against my colleagues across the aisle all night. I've got 2 years to make the affirmative case for progress, for progressive progress, for Democrats. And so I want to speak to that affirmative case. And I'm only going to lift a couple of things because I need to hear from all of you. That's really why you came here, right? So in using the power of the pen, I should add, I chair the Abortion Rights and Access Task Force under the Pro-Choice Caucus. And so am on the front lines of all efforts relative to litigation, legislation, and mobilization. And more recently, I've introduced legislation to protect our fundamental rights through the EACH Act in partnership with my big sister, Congresswoman Barbara Lee. And this would expand access to abortion care regardless of the type of health insurance you have. It would repeal the Hyde Amendment. This is racist, it is discriminatory, and I do not believe anyone should be denied access to health care. And abortion care is health care based on race, income, or how you pay your insurance. And so that is what the EACH Act would address. It would repeal the Hyde Amendment. Last month, I also reintroduced my bill with Senator Booker, so this is a bicameral bill, to create the American Opportunity Accounts Act. There's a reason why we use the shorthand baby bonds, because it's easy to get tripped up over that. Frank, you working with me? Okay. All right. So we reintroduced our baby bonds legislation. This is a matter of racial, economic justice, narrowing the racial wealth gap. So what baby bonds would do is give every child a better chance at economic mobility by creating an interest-bearing seed savings account at birth of $1,000. This is focused on the lowest socioeconomic incomes. And at the age of 18, those funds can be withdrawn, so there's deposits being paid over time, as is a seed-bearing account, for 3 permissible uses: purchasing a home, so building wealth; starting a business, building wealth; or pursuing higher education, which I'm still in that fight to get higher education to actually be affordable. I'll put a pin in that, okay? I got to stick to the script, all right? But legislation like baby bonds, when I talked about the power of the pen to legislate equity, I think it's important that we are as precise in undoing centuries of harm as people were precise in legislating it. We have to be just as precise, just as specific. And so right here in the Massachusetts 7th, we experience deep economic disparities. As you all have heard me say many times before, and I'll keep saying it until the outcomes change, in a 3-mile radius, median household income from Cambridge to Roxbury, specifically to Nubian Square, the blackest part of my district, life expectancy drops by 30 years. and median household income by $50,000. That is the result of policy violence. Didn't just happen. So when people talk about this so-called racial reckoning, I challenge that because we will not truly be in a reckoning until we are undoing centuries of harm and we are codifying the value of every life, centering the humanity and the dignity of every life in our budgets and policies. And so I want to change the legacy and the outcomes of the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District, one of the most unequal districts in the country and the most unequal in our congressional delegation. Okay, so we spoke about the ERA, spoke about the EACH Act, we spoke about baby bonds. I should add that our own treasurer, Deb Goldberg, is actually piloting a baby bonds program here in the Commonwealth. So I will keep you posted on that as we continue to fight the fight to get this passed federally. We do see states, governors throughout the country that are piloting baby bonds programs. So please do stay tuned about that. These policies are powerful tools to center equity in the national discourse. So once again, although Democrats are in the minority, there is nothing minor about the work we must do, the vision we must have, and the impact that you must feel. I think we lose when we play small. I don't want you to know what I am doing or what my Democratic colleagues are doing because you read a press release. I want you to know because you feel the impact of those policies every single day. And that is the work that myself and my team seek to take on. I mentioned earlier the power of the movement. One such example is our getting President Biden to take executive action on student debt cancellation. This was an issue that people saw as fringe, sought to marginalize, to say this policy would be, or this action would be regressive and impact. And we worked for 2 years to organize. I was a lead negotiator to the White House, working with Senator Warren and Leader Schumer. And because of the strength of this movement, the amplification of your stories, the president took executive action. Now, this effort is currently stalled due to But that being said, President Biden has the authority. I continue to appeal and organize and mobilize on the steps of the Supreme Court that they hear us and they simply apply the law and not play politics with people's lives, because we know this is an issue of consequence, a nearly $2 trillion crisis. Educators, like the dedicated ones here, who took on debt to be nation builders and now cannot afford childcare and rent to even try to meet these monthly minimums. Parents who took out Parent Plus loans, who are now close to 70 and can't retire because they're still paying on loans they took out to take care of their babies and set them on the best path. Elders, 76 years old in my district, on fixed incomes, who've had their benefits garnished because they still owe student debt. So this is an issue of consequence. The executive action that Biden took said that if you were a Pell Grant recipient, which are our most vulnerable borrowers, $20,000 would be canceled. Non-Pell Grant recipients, $10,000 would be canceled. This is an economic justice issue. It is a racial justice issue, given the disparate burden on Black and brown borrowers borrow at higher rates, default at higher rates because of policy violence that denied our family the ability to build generational wealth. And it's a gender justice issue. 2/3 of this debt is on the shoulders of women. So after the executive action, we took our show on the road, because I don't believe if you build it, they will come. It's only true if people know about it. So myself and Senator Warren, we got on the road. I mean, we really did. We road trip. We fought over the radio. I wanted New Edition. She pushed for Patsy Cline. Should tell you a little bit about our relationship. In the end, I yielded to her seniority, and so we played Patsy Cline. But we traveled throughout the Commonwealth to make sure eligible borrowers were signing up. And in 4 weeks in the country, 26 million people signed up. 40 million plus people are eligible for this relief. In the Commonwealth alone, over 100,000 in the Massachusetts 7th eligible. And in that 4-week period, 70% signed up. So we need to get this done like yesterday. So I believe in the power of the movement. I believe with our pressure, and at the end of the day, the Supreme Court will realize that President Biden has the authority. And when we win, I'll continue to press for every eligible borrower to apply. As I spoke about the power of the purse, and Mayor Ballantyne enumerated some of those investments right here in Somerville, I'm proud to share that each and every one of my community project funding requests, CPF, those used to be called earmarks. I see the press nodding. Were secured for the district. So that translates into $22 million brought home through these projects the last 2 years. So we spoke of the power of the movement and getting the president to act on executive action. The power of the pen with policies like baby bonds. And this is the power of the purse. So these projects will support investments to build a more just and equitable MA 7th through trauma-informed health care. Quick digression there. I'm really going to get in trouble, but I got to tell you. President Biden recently signed one of my bills into law, the Post-Disaster Mental Health Act. This is a technical fix with FEMA. Whether there is a major disaster or emergency declaration in the wake of an extreme weather event, which are growing because of the climate crisis, or in the event of terrorism, that those impacted, primary, secondary trauma, will receive psychological first aid. Not only people get support for physical wounds, but that there is that psychological first aid. And President Biden just signed that into law. So trauma-informed policy, trauma-informed healthcare, workforce development, affordable housing, equity in education, environmental justice, transit justice, and more. These are some of the projects that were funded with this $22 million in community project funding. These are investments in our people, a reflection of our partnership with cities, towns, grassroots advocates across the district. Finally, as I close, my team is like, thank God. Whether you're talking about a tax on bodily autonomy, whether you're talking about police brutality, whether you're talking about violence from Ukraine to Syria, everyone deserves to be and feel safe. Everyone deserves to show up in the world fully, authentically, unapologetically as themselves, without fear, without discrimination. And that is the work that I seek to do each and every day in partnership with you. Speaking of you, We'll now turn it over, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
So I'm going to be reading off the questions. If you have written your name, I will read your first name, if you're all okay with that. So Betsy asked, airplane noise. In the past 6 months, our neighborhoods have been subject to intolerable noise from a staggering and historic shift in Logan Airport's runway 33L that was not announced nor adequately discussed and accounted for. How are you able to help us?
Well, one, I'm working very closely with your state representatives who are leading on these issues for those communities and municipalities that have been disproportionately impacted. We know this is a very real issue. Quality of life matters. It threatens quality of life. Also, as someone who every day seeks to do the work of mitigating poor health outcomes, it's also an environmental justice and public health issue. I am a member of the Quiet Skies Caucus in Congress. We have many caucuses that are issue-based, ideological. This is one that I'm a part of. So I will tap back in. We're just sort of getting back to school, if you will, and better understand what efforts are specifically underway. But I know that your state delegation has been actively working around what are those fixes, responsive to the things that you've already called for. I just don't know where we are on the list because this is not a new issue. It has been a persistent and nagging one, and I thank you for your question.
And if I could just add from the city's side, we will be happy to work with the congressman, share the feedback, some of the ideas. We've also been hearing over the last month some ideas from constituents, so we'll pass that on. Thank you. So next is Jen. Didn't we learn our lesson from 2008? How did another bank fail and threaten our communities with a possible recession? Is there any way to actually make sure this doesn't happen again?
It's a lot there. Okay. So obviously, this is causing a lot of anxiety, understandably so, for workers, for businesses, families in the Massachusetts 7th and beyond. This is the second largest bank collapse in American history. And make no mistake about it, this collapse was made possible by Republicans' very dangerous bank deregulation during the Trump era. So throughout the weekend, I serve on the Financial Services Committee. And so working very closely with Ranking Member Waters, I've been in close touch with FDIC, with Treasury and other regulators, and have really stressed the importance of quick and transparent action to provide depositors access to funds. Also, using the power of platform, letterhead, and committee, I am urgently calling for a hearing to investigate the bank's collapse and how Republicans' 2018 bank deregulation bill contributed to SVB's really risky behavior and jeopardized financial stability for far too many. So we have to get to the bottom of this. We have to ensure accountability, make depositors whole, and prevent a collapse like this from ever happening again. So, you know, it never should have occurred in the first place. I hope that answers your question. I should also add, since I mentioned that I serve on Financial Services Committee, a couple of other data points for you. So I serve on the Financial Services Committee. I chair the Abortion Rights and Access Task Force. I co-chair the Bike Caucus. I am a co-founder of the Future of Transportation Caucus. And I also vice chair the Task Force on Aging and Families. And finally, I co-chair the House Haiti Caucus, as I'm very proud to represent the third largest Haitian diaspora in the country. Right, it's coming from a fee that's paid into a larger, I don't know, yes, it's not coming from taxpayers, okay? That's our first question, and that's the most important thing really to note here. So regulators and the president have said that banks, rather than taxpayers, will bear the cost of any losses related to SVB's failure. I certainly hope that is true. And as I said, I am often looking for ways with which to conduct congressional oversight. Though y'all should know I've been removed from oversight. I think they didn't want me there with Marjorie Taylor Greene. But I still have the letterhead. And so I'm still conducting congressional oversight, okay? All right.
All right, the next question is from Mary Ann. Lifting the cap on Social Security, question mark, please, please. So I think it's, can you lift the cap on Social Security?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I think what we're trying to, is someone trying to get at here with this question, is this about whether or not the solvency, and that's, listen, we have to, this is, yeah, I mean, it's hard because, like, I agree, you know, I mean, these safety nets are really critical, and they take care of our most vulnerable, and we have to, what the Republicans are, the ways in which they are trying to negotiate and play with people's lives around the budget is to the peril and detriment of everyone. We have to maintain the full faith and credit, you know, pay these bills, and we should not touch Social Security and any other, you know, safety net or entitlement programs. Full stop. This is not a partisan issue. This is just a matter of, I don't know, humanity. I mean, I hate to put a values frame on it, but look, it's very real. The boomers are booming. You know, we need to take care of folks. And I feel very confident about the solvency of it for future generations as well. This is not anything that we should be ever negotiating. Okay.
So next up is Andrea. What is the Congresswoman's current thinking on the support for Ukraine?
Okay, lots of open-ended. It's tough because I think I'm in a room full of people of whom I am of like mind, and as I said, you know, everyone deserves to have peace and safety. Putin's war, and it is Putin's war, is cruel, it's violent, it's claiming civilian lives, and so we have to press for peace and humanitarian aid. The bloodshed and the trauma has got to end. And so I've continued to be supportive of humanitarian aid and those investments. It is, I mean, it's devastating. It's devastating, and it just, I mean, there's, I don't know. Look, I have an optimism bias, and I think you all do too, or you wouldn't be here. But it is very hard to see what's happening in Ukraine. It's hard to see what's happening in Syria. It's hard to see what's happening in Haiti. It's hard to see what's happening in Somalia. You know, and I do just want to say on that note, I really do hope that everyone here believes that our freedoms and our destinies are tied, and that, you know, the work that we do must also be a commitment globally. And if we're all, you know, it can't just be about what's happening domestically. So the values that I believe many of us in this room share have to be applied globally as well.
Thank you. So next up is Sarah. and you touched upon student debt a little bit earlier, but this is also, what is your plan B if the Supreme Court rules student debt forgiveness is unlawful?
Well, first let me just say, before I even get to a plan B, I'm not prepared to talk about contingency plans. President Biden has the authority. The legal case is sound, full stop. Supreme Court needs to apply the law. Now, I can't pretend that I'm not worried, because we have seen the Supreme Court operate with the absence of justice, overturning the will of the majority of the people on voting rights, on housing rights, and on reproductive rights. But the legal case is sound. I believe we will be victorious. And if we are not, then and only then will I come back to you to talk about a plan B. But just know that we won't start working on a plan B then. There are many mechanisms, there are many levers available here. But the legal case is sound, and they should just apply the law.
The next question does not have a name on it, but it is a federally funded savings account for children similar to a Social Security program with similar challenges? And if it's across the board, it also benefits the wealthy with our tax dollars. Can you address these two aspects of the proposal?
Oh, with my baby bonds, it's focused on those in the lowest socioeconomic brackets. So it's precise. It's focused on those in the lowest socioeconomic brackets, and the estimations are that the money accrued, given those deposits annually for those 18 years, would range anywhere from $18,000 to $24,000. And as I said, this is being piloted in states throughout the country, but not at the $1,000 level. The pilots are usually at about $500.
So the next question is from Gloria. What paths do you see to financial reform that invests in people rather than corporations? And then there's a statement, it's complicated.
I mean, that was going to be my answer. Oh, okay, where do I begin on that? Okay, first, again, did you all notice during the pandemic how there were a lot of things done that we've been told for decades could never be done? Right? You see people using ARPA funds to pilot universal basic income efforts, which I fully support as an example. I think federally we need to make the child tax credit permanent. You know, that's an example of the type of policies that I think we need to be advancing. We still have the White House. The president needs to be using executive action more. We saw him do that this week when it comes to gun violence prevention. We've seen him be a great partner in the threats on reproductive rights and abortion care, and using executive action in that way, and having a whole of government response. So we still have the power of executive action, and I'm also not going to stop pushing the White House, because that's the spirit of partnership, is accountability and that push. So the child tax credit would be, you know, an example, because, like I said, I want policies that people feel the impact of. For people that were getting $500 a child and feeling the impact of that policy, given inflation and rising costs and rising rents, it really is about stabilizing all those other costs. I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at, but how I'm trying to do that is with by making public transportation free through the Freedom to Move Act. With Senator Markey, I think public transit is a public good, and we should invest in it accordingly. I also delivered through community project funding to Bunker Hill Community College $1 million for tuition-free community college. to support the City of Boston's pilot program, because although I am a lead negotiator and have been championing the cause for student debt cancellation, we know that doesn't address the root cause. We need to expand Pell Grants. We need to invest in HBCUs. We need to invest in vocational education. But again, we have to stabilize all these other costs. When it comes to housing, personally, I'm supportive of rent stabilization as well, tenants' right of first refusal, and have also introduced numerous bills like down payments towards equity, which would give first-time homeowners that down payment, assistance. I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at. I'm just focused on how I can get more direct investment to the people, because that's our greatest infrastructure, is our people. Let me see if there's anything else I want to lift up here in that vein, since you said it's complicated. Okay, we spoke about student debt, housing, transportation, the ERA, pay equity. So I think I'll stop there for now. Okay, I might come back to that though. Okay, go ahead.
So the next one is from Andy. Housing faces a major shortage of stock compared to prospective buyers. The down payment towards Equity Act seems like a great step, but are you or your colleagues considering measures to increase supply or limit enormous landlords' ability to buy up ever more properties?
The short answer is yes. There are many efforts, actually, as we're very early in the 118th Congress, okay? And one of the things that we're fighting is that Chair McHenry has not enumerated affordable housing or ending homelessness as a priority of the committee. When Ranking Member Waters was the chair, we had 55 hearings on affordable housing. And we were criticized by our colleagues across the aisle that was too many hearings on the topic. But it's our job to be responsive to the needs of our constituents, and we hear that in every room. We know housing and affordable housing that is safe and clean matters because it's a determinant of health. When I tell you that there's a 30-year lifespan difference between Cambridge and Roxbury, housing has a lot to do with that. It's a critical determinant of health. It's social and economic mobility. It's wealth building. I know that President Biden is committed to making greater investments when it comes to supply. And I don't mean to relitigate the past, but the Inflation Reduction Act that passed was originally the Build Back Better Act. And we had $150 billion in there for housing, both to address supply, both to address and preserve existing affordable housing, and also to address deferred maintenance in public housing. And unfortunately, Build Back Better died. And so ultimately what was passed was the Inflation Reduction Act, which did make some important and critical investments in the climate fight and in lowering the cost of prescription drugs, which is huge. But that fight for those greater investments continues, and I'm going to have to also lean on my partners in municipal government and state government. For those of you who are not familiar with the Down Payment for Equity Act, the Financial Services Committee did pass my legislation. This is a bill that was authored and introduced in partnership with Maxine Waters. And we believe this would address the racial wealth gap by investing $100 billion in down payment assistance for first generation and first time home buyers. I want to also draw your attention to a recent report by HUD, and I'm working closely now with the Secretary to address this, is racial discrimination and bias from appraisers. So, black home ownership is the lowest it's been since the FHA was introduced. And then you have appraisers who are not accurately valuing homes. And they have done a number of investigative efforts there. And so that is one other thing that I'm looking at, because if I'm fighting to get people homes in order to address the racial wealth gap and to grow and build wealth and have equity, but the homes are devalued, that is highly problematic, and that has been going on for decades. I also introduced the Tenant Empowerment Act, which would strengthen HUD tenant protections and provide them with the tools necessary to improve the quality of their homes. What that means is if you're in public housing, if there are repairs that need to be done, you don't have to pay your rent, you can put it in escrow. If you pay out of your own pocket to make repairs, then you are reimbursed. And also that you are protected from any retribution for organizing on behalf of yourself and your neighbors if you are living in subpar housing. Finally, I've introduced the Grand Family Housing Act. This did actually, this did pass the House. Where's my staff? I just wanted, yeah, okay, this did pass the House. This is a bill that I introduced with Jim McGovern. Grand families are a family model that have quadrupled in the last decade. These are grandparents raising grandchildren. And we have especially seen a boom in this during the pandemic. The number of grandparents that are now raising grandchildren is staggering because of the opioid crisis, because of mass incarceration, because of growing poverty, people who thought all their parenting was in the rear view on fixed incomes. And so this bill did pass the House, and this would help grand families to access safe, affordable, and appropriate housing. There's a lot more to it, but that's the top lines of it. And then, as I said, I do support rent stabilization efforts in the city of Boston specifically. I know that's something the Mayor Wu's championing, and I hope the legislature will be supportive. Okay.
Next up is Brooks. What accounts for the very high cost of building infrastructure in the U.S., and what are your priorities to lower infrastructure costs? I could chime in a little bit on the local level. What we've learned certainly is how interdependent we are, not only across the United States, but also with international countries where we get supplies. So people, at least what we've heard is, as we're trying to build over here and we're building in other parts, is that there's not enough workers to, well, during COVID, that's when there weren't enough workers that were working at the time. There were interruptions in supply chain management. So there was high demand, lower components or construction materials. So it, there was an imbalance. There wasn't enough. There was high demand and not enough supplies. So I will just say, prices just started going up. So I would say that's what we've experienced at the local level. Some of the building supplies and sort of modular units that we're trying to source are like over years out, or also trying to put in public toilets that are called Portland loos, have been years in, trying to get them on supply because there aren't enough out there. But I think it's primarily there was an interruption in workforce, and then not enough supplies were being made. This is how it's been explained to me. So it delayed projects. And how can you lower the infrastructure costs?
I'm not sure what definition you're applying of infrastructure. I will just say I use a very broad one. So I just answered housing, and that's something that I fought for while a member of financial services. The fact that housing is not currently considered infrastructure is insane. That's our most expensive infrastructure. Secondly, as co-founder of the Future of Transportation Caucus, one of the things that I've been championing with that, and why we created the caucus, is to push for federal investment to not just be highways, roads, and bridges, but to be investments in multimodal infrastructure, and that in our federal funding, what we are prioritizing is connectivity, sustainability, equity. We just need a complete paradigm shift. And so we were successful in the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill in getting some investments in public transit, but we need to do much more, because I see transportation justice as connected to everything else. It's how we meet our sustainability goals. It's how we meet our economic justice goals. It's how we meet our racial justice goals. When I talk to you about that $50,000 median income drop from Cambridge to Roxbury, there was a study done by Livable Streets in Boston, and Black Boston bus riders were riding, waiting, transferring an additional 64 hours a year. So that means you're riding, waiting, transferring longer to get to work, to get to school, to get to a healthcare appointment, to get to childcare. So all of those things do add up. So we have made strides in getting an incremental shift to see some of that federal investment in public transit. But as I said, Senator Markey and I introduced the Freedom to Move Act, which would make public transit free. And that's what I'm going to continue to fight for. So that's how I think of infrastructure. Okay.
Thank you. So this will be the last question, and it's from Katie. As we look to 2024, what qualities do you ideally want to see in the Democratic nominee for president?
Leave it to Somerville. You know how many coffees I've done? No one has asked me that question. 60% of the questions asked here today only came from Somerville. Yeah, clap for yourselves. No softballs in Somerville, not ever. What qualities do you ideally want to see in the Democratic nominee for president? You know, I believe that Democrats win when we go big and bold. And that sounds, trite, but let me give an example. You take an issue like student debt, which they said was fringe and marginal. You take an issue like abortion rights, which they predicted would not be that big a deal to people. In the midterms, 18 to 35-year-olds outpaced 65 plus because that motivated them to the polls. And so what that says to me, and ultimately these are things that President Biden campaigned on, that people don't want us to play small. So we need to go as broad, as big, and as deep as the hurt, and as I said, and also as big as the innovation, as the dreams, as the aspiration. I don't think that people want tinkering. I know there's been those debates. People don't want another FDR. Yes, they do. Yes, and better. Yes, they do. So that's what I'm looking for, and I'm just going to leave that there because that is a very loaded question, and I'm going to stop there. Okay. So, I don't know. What do you guys want from me? Somebody empathetic, compassionate. We have that, right? Someone who's going to be responsive, right, to the needs of the people, meet the moment. And I think we've had that. So, okay. All right. Now, I do want to just go back to something. And that is when we did our shout outs to facility staff, they were not in the room. And so I do just want to once again thank Frank and Butch for taking good care of us this evening. Thank you for what you do every day. Thank you for your support tonight. There will be, if you're so inclined, although you know I love a good selfie because I know all the angles, but if you would like to get a photo in a photo line, I want to direct you to Eddie Rupia from my team, and he will get you set up. Okay? I thank our mayor. I thank each and every one of you for joining us. I thank you for your thoughtful questions. Please, if your question was misunderstood or not fully answered, please do circle back because we want to make sure that you leave here with clarity on whatever was you inquired about. Okay? Thank you all once again for being here. Greatly appreciate you.